Hello, travelers, and welcome to Go See, Do, Explore.
Here, we dive deep into the heart of travel, sharing hidden gems, unforgettable experiences, and the stories that make each destination unique.
Whether you're a seasoned traveler or dreaming of your next getaway, you're in the right place to get inspired.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashleigh.
And together, we'll set the course for your next great adventure and discover the stories that make each place unforgettable.
It's time to go, see, and do more. Let's explore. For this week's episode, we decided that we wanted to talk about why we cruise. So since we've been married, we've taken 7 cruises on, I think, 4 different cruise lines, and we have only repeated 1 port. So I feel like we are pretty savvy cruisers, I would say. Would you agree?
I agree.
The number one reason I think that we cruise is to see the world. Like I just said, in 7 cruises, we've only repeated 1 port. So I like to find cruises that are unique destinations and that visit places that we haven't seen so that we can get kind of a taste of what the place is like and then plan a return trip, which we actually have, I think, our 3rd return trip to a place that we discovered by cruising. It's the 3rd place that we're going to be revisiting from a cruise. Granted, it's San Francisco, which is probably not a place that most people see by boat, but I think that's one of the reasons that we like cruising. You get to experience lots of different places in one vacation.
I was thinking of San Juan in Puerto Rico, a place that we've absolutely fallen in love with, a place that we went originally because we had a cruise leaving from there. Now, we had wanted to go to Puerto Rico, and we were excited to book a cruise from there. So it's not like we were indifferent from the beginning, but I don't think we expected to fall in love with Puerto Rico in the way that we did, and to have been back there now twice in a period of basically 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it can be really good. Now, that was an embarkation port, but that can just as easily happen with stops along the way, too. And there are some, like St. Lucia, for example, that we keep talking about as a place we need to get back to. And we were there for 1 day on a cruise. Right.
Some of these places really just kind of leave a mark on you. And obviously, a cruise visits a destination for like maybe 6-7 hours. So obviously you're not able to totally dig deep into a destination on a cruise, not typically, but it does kind of give you an idea of what places you like and maybe what places you don't need to go back to. We did get lucky, like I mentioned with San Francisco. We actually had an overnight in San Francisco, which is kind of uncommon in cruising. It does happen that there's overnight ports, and the fact that it's like in kind of a world-class city was a really cool experience.
It was awesome. Yeah, really great.
The second reason that we like to cruise, the second main reason I should say, is the value. When you think about the cost of a cruise divided up over 7 days or however many, you can get cruises that are the same price as a moderately priced hotel on land. And then you think about the fact that per night cost includes your lodging, your transportation, entertainment, activities during the day. Am I missing anything?
No, those are the big ones, but it allows you to go place to place in a really, really affordable way and in a nice way.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely, cruise accommodations can be nicer than what we probably would choose on land because we tend to be more budget travelers. And then the third main reason that we cruise is that it's just a very relaxing experience. You don't have to worry about how you're getting from point A to point B. You can hang out on the ship, play trivia during the day. Some people hang out at the bars. And you don't have to worry about how you're getting to your next destination because it's going there. There's all kinds of sometimes world-class entertainment on these cruise ships. Actually, our last 2 cruises had the exact same comedian, which was kind of funny. We really felt like we knew him at the end. But some cruise lines have Broadway-style shows. Like I mentioned, the trivia. There's games on deck. The belly flop contest, things like
skip
that.
That one. Not for me.
We're not really pool people. We don't really hang out at the pool on the cruise ship. We're more finding the activities that are happening out of direct sunlight. We're northerners.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But for me, when I say that a cruise is relaxing, what I really mean by it is not just that I'm lounging all day doing nothing, but if you compare cruising as a method of transportation to your other options, like maybe flying, and for many of these destinations, for most of these destinations, flying really is the alternative. You're going to be comfortable, and it's going to take longer, of course, but you're going to have your own room and places to eat and do things, and whatever style of traveler you are, there'll be something that you can do to enjoy and pass the time in a beautiful environment rather than being crammed in an airplane. And I mean, I love flying too, but it's just it's a whole different game. And it has been a fantastic way to see different parts of the world in a way that I just don't have to worry about how to get from place to place.
Well, and too, like I mentioned before we were recording, you can unpack and that's it for the entire trip. If you're going on a road trip and seeing different places, you might stay in a place for 2 nights and then you got to put all your stuff back in the suitcase and get back in the car to head to the next destination, where a cruise will take you to sometimes 5 or 6 destinations if you pick one of those really island heavy itineraries. But you only have to unpack once, which is a big relief, honestly.
Yeah.
Not worried about leaving something behind, because I always seem to leave something behind, no matter how much we travel. Now, one thing to be aware of when you are thinking about taking a cruise, we really recommend that, especially when you're cruising, you have travel insurance. So really, travel insurance, I think, is a good idea pretty much anytime you're traveling and you have money put down on a trip. But when it comes to cruising, especially, the medical costs can be very high if you get sick or injured on a ship. And if something happens and you need to be evacuated off of that ship, helicopter rescues are in the tens of thousands of dollars. And you don't want to be left with that enormous burden, because most of the time your health insurance is not going to cover it.
I feel like $50,000 is the number that people throw around. I'm sure it varies dramatically depending on kind of where you are in the world and your proximity to land and all that. But it is not going to be cheap.
Yeah, so that's just something to think of when you are thinking about cruising. And we recommend that you don't buy your travel insurance through whoever you are booking your trip from, whether that be the airline or the cruise line or the vacation destination. There are marketplaces. One, we are not affiliated, but we recommend insuremytrip.com. It is a marketplace of various different travel insurance companies. You can see different rates, what they cover. I highly recommend buying it that way rather than from the provider of your travel, because I mean, I don't think the major airlines or the major cruise lines are going out of business, but in the event that they did go out of business and they are your insurer, you just lost that money.
Another really good reason is if you're going through I just booked some flights the other day, so this is fresh in my mind. More on that later. But you get to the end, it's like, hey, $13, and you can protect your trip, protect your investment, right? It's only for those flights. If you book it for your cruise, it's only for that cruise. It's far more economical to just buy one plan that will protect basically all of it and give you a lot more control in the kind of protection you need, anywhere from really only true emergencies to cancel for any reason. On the other hand, all those plans exist and they cover your entire trip, any purchase you would make, not just that one particular aspect. That's another reason. It may be more efficient sometimes to work with an insurance claim with one of these folks that you buy it directly from them, but the benefit of having that plan that covers it all is much better overall.
And if you travel more than, I want to say twice a year, it might be a better value to get an annual travel insurance policy. So that's just something for you to think about as well.
This is what we've done now, and it's already proven to be a good idea, because now, what is it, 100 miles? Any trip we take that's more than 100 miles away from home is covered. So little weekend trips that we never would have bought plans for are now covered by this, which is really nice. And yeah, the cost is not more than maybe 2 plans or whatever, than 2 one-off plans. Well, I guess it's my turn to talk about ethical issues. I'm not sure why the ethics are always my thing, but I don't think it would be right to talk about all the benefits of cruising without painting a picture of some of the potential downfalls and things of that nature. And I think you'll find with us, except in rare cases, really, you're not going to find us to be overly prescriptive, but I think it's important for everyone to know what the issues are and grapple with those issues and make a decision that they feel is a good and right decision. And so it's really important not to be blind to the ethical problems. I'm going to talk about a few. I'm sure there are more. And if there's one that I'm not aware of, I would love, honestly, for you to enlighten me. But there are a few obvious ones. The first one is the environmental issue. Obviously, you've got a big piece of steel using fossil fuels to push itself all over the globe. And essentially for pleasure, right? People are not taking these to and from jobs or anything like that.
I want to see that ship.
Right. So it's important to understand what that means. And also to know that certain cruise lines have made efforts to make their ships more environmental. And there's a lot in the cruise industry going on with alternative fuels, alternative propulsion, things like that to be aware of. Again, not going to make prescriptions on what you should and should not do, but know what's going on and be aware of what the cruise line you're interested in sailing is, how they're approaching these sorts of issues, know whether they've almost been banned from U.S. ports for not complying with regulations in Alaska. Just be aware of those things, because you want to be able to feel good about your travel, and you want to be able to do what you can to make sure that you as an individual have a net positive impact in the world. And it's just important for all these issues to just be aware and to make right decisions. There are several economic issues, probably more than I'm going to mention, but there are a couple that I think are really important to touch. The first one is that cruising absolutely can cause over-tourism in certain ports. The one that for me comes to mind is San Juan. It's certainly not the only one by a long shot. Venice is another one. We haven't been to Venice, but that's another really, really famous case where cruises are causing problems. We were just in San Juan not that long ago, and we were there for 2 days. One day with, was it 3 ships?
I think so, yeah.
3 ships there, and another day with no ships. And oh my gosh, completely different city. Completely different city. It's not that the people from the cruise ships as individuals, for the most part, were causing issues. It's just that there were so many of them. There are these like really narrow streets, lots of traffic, and it made the city far less comfortable.
There were longer waits at the restaurants.
Yeah.
There were just people, I don't know, it seemed like there wasn't enough space for them. They were spilling out into the street.
I can't imagine living and working there on those days. The second day with no ships, it was delightful. And I think some of this is probably on the industry to consider and work out. Like, is it a good idea to dump 3 cruise ships versus people in this like old fortified colonial city? Probably not, right? The cruise industry probably should have some accountability in that too. But you as a traveler can think about, okay, if I'm going to be in this place, if I'm booking this itinerary, how can I minimize my footprint and not make this totally disastrous for everyone? I think that's a good thing to think about. The other side of over-tourism, and perhaps the less obvious but more damaging one, like Venice really comes to mind for this one, is that oftentimes cruise passengers do not spend that much money in a cruise port. A lot of them are eating on the ship. They're obviously sleeping on the ship. And this is why some cities have really rejected cruising in recent years. It can cause this phenomenon where the city is full and no one spends any money, which is really bad, right? It'd be one thing if the city was full, but business was booming. You could wrangle your way around that and figure out how to grow. But when the space is taken up by people who are not benefiting the place economically, that's actually a curse on the businesses. And so it's really important, if you're visiting places, to consider how you can be an economic benefit to those places. I think you would do that naturally if you were arriving by another way. And so considering that too, and considering that places like Venice, places like maybe San Juan, maybe those aren't the itineraries you want to take. That's, again, not being prescriptive. It's for you to decide. But there are lots of places actually where the cruise ships are the big economic benefit. Lots of places, especially in the Caribbean, where that is the case. And so maybe those are better itineraries, right? That's something to think about and consider.
We kind of got hit over the head with this a little bit. We kind of mentioned that we took a Pacific coastal cruise that went up and down the coast of California last spring. And a few weeks before we sailed, we were supposed to stop in Monterey, but Monterey actually banned cruise ships. And so we got to Santa Barbara, which is a city that doesn't get that many cruise ships a year. And we were met with a very interesting kind of reaction from the locals. So many people were kind of giving us the side eye, talking about the boat people and saying things like, well, maybe we need to ban cruise ships next. This is honestly, before this, I don't know that I had ever really thought about this.
Right.
I mean, I kind of heard people talk about it in Venice specifically, and especially during COVID when the cruise ships stopped coming into the canals and then you were seeing dolphins in the canals again. You see the impact. That's a very clear, visible impact. I think COVID had a lot of those clear impacts when people stopped moving. But just something to think about. You want to make sure that if you're visiting a place, you are being a good visitor.
Yeah, that place doesn't exist for your enjoyment only, right? People live there. People work there. It was there before you. It'll be there after you. So just be good while you're there, right? Okay, here I am being prescriptive. But this is the thing to be aware of and to think about. I know, obviously, Monterey, California doesn't need cruisers. It's doing just fine with people getting there in other ways. There are places in the Caribbean, especially in other parts of the world, where that's not the case. I mean, they really are relying on that industry, and that's just a distinction to consider. The other economic, before I move off of economic, the other one to consider is that we talked about what a great value cruising is. It really is a great value. One of the reasons why it's such a great value is because you are taking advantage of foreign labor. And I think sometimes if you're from the United States or another kind of top tier economic country, it's something that you don't like to think about very much. I know I don't like to think about it, but I think you have to look at those people as people and understand what's happening, right? They might be smiling at you because they are genuinely happy people. I mean, that may be the case, but they also might be doing what they're doing because your inexpensive vacation is actually so much money, even though they're paid not very much money at all. It's supporting their family back in the Philippines or in India or in some other place. And again, we cruise. So I'm not saying this is a reason to never cruise, but be wide awake about that and see what you can do while you're on the ship to, one, treat people decently, and two, to help them economically. Like that's something that I think you should not, even though it's a little ugly, you can't look away. You have to understand what's happening. It's really important. Okay, there's one more off of economic issues. I'm sure there are more we could talk about. There's one that is maybe not quite an ethical issue, but I still think it's an important sort of caveat to apply to cruising. Cruising is wonderful, but it's one of those types of vacations where it would be possible to travel most of the world and remain in your bubble, and unfortunately miss out on some of the impact that travel can have on you. So much ink has been spilled over the positive impact travel has on people's worldviews, the way it can erode ignorance and bigotry, the way it can foster peace and cooperation. And the truth is, cruising can do that too, and I think it does it for us, but it only does so because we are really intentional about making sure it does so, and making sure we try to find, when possible, we try to find true cultural experiences, not because we want to post on Instagram that we did something authentic, but because we want our travels to have an impact on us. We want our travels to make us broader minded and better citizens. And just, you can absolutely do that on a cruise. You just have to make sure that you're aware. And I think this is something too, if you're traveling with people who are less experienced, whether those be friends or whether those be children or whomever, anyone you have influence on, trying to frame cruising up in that way, or any kind of traveling, frame it up in that way. Like, we're here to have a good time. We're here to relax, enjoy ourselves, kick back from our regular lives. But also, some amount of this vacation should leave us changed. I think pretty much any vacation should do that if you're traveling, in my opinion, and just make sure you think about cruising with that in mind. It's important. I feel like I talked about that more than you talked about all the things we like, but we have more things that we like. First, though, we're going to go to a wine break. Okay, we're here at the wine break. Today we have Good Harbor Red. Good Harbor Vineyards is in Good Harbor, Michigan.
On Leelanau Peninsula.
On Leelanau Peninsula. It's like sort of the western part, northwestern part between Glen Arbor and Leland. It is adjacent to Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, a place that we've discussed on our Michigan bucket list. It's part of that Leelanau County wine region, the Leelanau AVA in Michigan, one of its 5 AVAs. That's probably for another episode. But this is, for Michigan, a fairly mass market wine. Actually, you can get it at our local grocery store. It's really good. I mean, it's an inexpensive wine. It's not like necessarily like a really, really special wine. But it is special, at least to me, I think maybe to Ashleigh too, because we bought this bottle in November of 2020. It was one of our first trips as we were able to start traveling again in 2020. Not our very first, but I'd say one of the first. And we went up and camped at D.H. Day State Park, which was also, we talked about in our Michigan bucket list. The wind was howling. We were there in our runaway camper, and we went to a bunch of wineries in Leelanau. And this was one of them, and Good Harbor was one I think we left surprised by and really enjoying, and we've been back there since then. But I saved this one bottle, even though it's non-vintage. I didn't want to save it for too many years, but saved this one bottle for a couple of years just to remember that trip and how much fun it was. It was a time, it was a particularly positive moment where we were feeling like we can travel again, and certain work things for me were going on the right track after having not necessarily been that way. But it was just a good time, and so we've got Good Harbor ready today. It's a blend. It's a red blend, and if you live in Michigan or around here, you can probably find it at your grocery store. I'm sure less than $15. Really good wine.
We always enjoy it, and it's kind of fun. We do this thing where when we travel and we buy wine, we try to put some of it away to be enjoyed at a later date as kind of like a time capsule.
Yes, we call it the capsule.
So this is one of those bottles from a very interesting point in time.
Yeah. It was so windy and just crazy. And I love Lake Michigan. It's a special thing. So inexpensive wine, but a special one for us.
Now, when you're planning a cruise, you have a lot of options, right? There are a lot of different cruise lines that cater to people that are looking for different experiences. And there are different ships. A small ship is going to be much different from I think the largest ship in the world right now is the Icon of the Seas, which is honestly like a floating mega city. I think it's gone past floating city at this point to something bigger than a floating city.
One of the comedians on one of the cruise ships we were on described those ships as having potentially bad neighborhoods, which I don't think was true, but it was very funny.
It was a funny joke.
Yeah.
So when you think about choosing a cruise line, you need to think about what kind of experience are you looking for? Are you looking for a budget cruise that might have a little bit of a party atmosphere, a budget cruise line that's looking for family-friendly activities, or are you looking for a more expensive, more high-end experience with really good food and wine education on board? So those are all options for you. I don't really think I need to get into what cruise line is known for each thing, but just be aware that it kind of runs from the very inexpensive party atmosphere to a pretty luxury experience with a celebrity chef, not necessarily preparing your meals, but as designing the menus. I've heard that Viking, which is a very high-end small ship experience, they actually have excursions in each port where you can go with the chef and go shopping with them to see where they get the food and what they buy. And I think
that sounds like work.
Well, yeah, that might be a little bit of work, but I still think that'd be a really cool experience.
It would be cool. I'm only joking.
So you've got to narrow that down. Do you want the mass market, a Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian a little bit, or do you want a little bit more high end where you're looking at Princess, Celebrity, Holland America, and then you've got the even higher luxury small ship, which I don't even necessarily know what they're all called because I've never looked in that category.
What about like the expedition ships?
So I don't think the mass market cruise lines have that, but I know for sure Celebrity, so I would assume Princess has it as well because they kind of do similar things where they have smaller ships that can go places that the bigger floating cities can't go. We got a brochure for the expedition ships from Celebrity where they go to Antarctica. And I guess this kind of gets into my next point about the different itineraries.
I mean, though, too, like the National Geographic ones.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about that. I would kind of put that in that third tier because they are very pricey. Okay. But When we were in Alaska, we saw a National Geographic ship that I think maybe only had 6 or 8 rooms. Very, very small.
Super cool.
Super cool. They had kayaks attached to the side of the ship. So when you're out in the fjord, you can get in the kayak and go paddle away, which I think would be amazing. And that is an even more expensive experience. I think that might be the 4th tier.
It's expensive for a very different reason, which is it's a small ship with a really specialized itinerary and skill set. And there's also, in Alaska, we saw a bunch of these. We saw Hurtigruten. I think I said that right. And National Geographic, too. We saw a very small National Geographic ship.
It looked like a ferry, honestly.
They do have some, they're still small, but larger that are, anyway, I think that's a cool, we've never done anything like that. I would love to. It's a very different sort of thing from like mainstream cruising.
Right. When I mentioned all the different cruise lines, I don't exactly know where, I think Disney would probably consider themselves to be in that luxury line with Princess or Celebrity. Their prices are outrageous, so I've never, if you listen to the last episode, you know I'm a Disney adult, but I have never wanted to fork over the price for a Disney cruise because I could take probably 3 Norwegian cruises for the same price.
Yeah. Disney, get in touch. We're available for purchase. You want our IP? We can talk.
So the other thing to think about when you're choosing a cruise is what kind of places do you want to visit? Are you looking to just escape the cold in the winter? Because Caribbean cruises are probably the cheapest cruises that you can find. And in the winter, there are a ton of them. If you want to go to the Bahamas, those are probably the cheapest. But then working your way up to what they call the ABC cruises. So Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao are probably the most expensive, typically Caribbean cruises. And then there's Mexico in there with Cozumel, or we really enjoyed our time in Costa Maya.
Yeah, or the west side of Mexico as well.
Those cruises, I think, also tend to be in that lower cost category with the Caribbean cruises because they typically leave out of California versus Florida. So it's a kind of potato kind of a thing. But then when you're looking at kind of more expensive options, more unique options, as we mentioned, we did a California coastal cruise, which honestly, I looked and I couldn't even find anything like that for this year. That was a pretty awesome cruise. And honestly, I don't know how we managed this. It was a California coastal cruise on Celebrity, which is our first time sailing Celebrity, and we really, truly enjoyed it. And it was the cheapest cruise we've ever booked.
This was the cheapest cruise we'd ever taken. Starting in 2012, when prices were a lot lower. We got really lucky.
I don't know how we got so lucky. And the cruise was only 60% full. So there were never lines for anything. I don't know. That's probably why they're not offering it this year.
I don't know if that was my favorite cruise overall, but every single day I was happy on that cruise. Every single day I'm like, this is a great cruise. We had so much fun.
Now, another big cruise market that we've mentioned already is Alaska. Obviously, in the summer, they position some ships from going down the Mexican Riviera up to Alaska. And I know a lot of people say that I would never cruise, but I would take a cruise to Alaska. I've heard a lot of people say that. And we did that it was a big anniversary trip. And Alaska, just like everybody says, is amazing. To be able to sail your ship down past fjords and see frozen waterfalls and then get to very unique ports that are very different from the Caribbean, obviously. Alaska cruises are expensive. If you find a deal on an Alaska cruise, be aware that everything else is going to be very expensive because you're on American soil paying American wages. The excursions are very expensive, and I guess remote locations too. 100% worth it, but just make sure to make your budget accordingly.
We had, I would say, a pretty good deal on that cruise. It wasn't an absolute steal, but the cruise itself was not super expensive. But I think we probably paid at least twice our cruise fare in excursions and things like that. And we didn't go totally hog wild either. I mean, you can really, if you want to do the helicopter to a glacier where then you ride in a dog sled, I mean, that's serious cash.
But also a once in a lifetime experience.
It sounds really fun, but just be ready for that. Don't be shocked. It's expensive.
And honestly, if you want to see Alaska, I really think cruising is probably the best way to go, especially a good introduction into Alaska, because you can see lots of different places without having to drive for days. I mean, Alaska is enormous.
Although I loved our Alaska cruise, but we did a round trip because that was just the nature of what we needed to do for our schedules. But I felt left leaving, wow, there's so much more of Alaska. Like, we just got a little taste of the Inside Passage. We didn't even get up kind of into Anchorage or places like that. And that is just scratching the surface. So that's one, like, to speak to cruising giving you a taste of something that you want more of. Like, I really want to do a big Alaska trip and go into the interior and all that. Big time.
Another big cruise destination, and one that we have not done yet, is the Mediterranean. So in the summer, they'll move some of those Caribbean cruise ships over to Europe to visit Spain and Italy, Greece, even into Croatia, and just see kind of these big world-class cities. Like I said, we haven't done the Mediterranean, so we don't really have any advice on that. But last summer, we did a transatlantic cruise. So they have to get those ships from the Caribbean to Europe. So we took one of those ships. They tend to be a little bit less expensive because you have 12 days total. And who can take that much time off work? Not young working people typically. So we sailed from Port Canaveral all the way to Lisbon, Portugal. And it was 12 days total. I want to say it was 8 total at sea, which for some people would probably be too many days at sea. But it was a nice way to relax. And also we got to visit some ports that the average cruise visitor wouldn't get to see. And probably my all-time favorite cruise port that we've ever visited is Ponta Delgada on San Miguel Island in the Azores, which is, before we booked this cruise, I had never heard of the Azores, but they are a group of islands that are Portuguese territory in the North Atlantic. And I don't know anyone else who's ever been to the Azores. And it was just this wonderful environment, unlike really anything we had ever seen before. I highly recommend a trip to the Azores. If you can get there on a cruise ship, that's great. But like we said before, we have that strong desire to go back.
Yeah.
And it's not really that easy of a place to get back to.
It's definitely in my rotation of flight searching. I'll tell you that. And if you have good connections to Boston, there are actually pretty good flights on Azores Airlines from...
And New York as well.
New York too. Yeah, those two, but especially Boston. They have good routes there.
But a place that we would never have discovered if it wasn't for cruising. And
I thought it was Spanish and somewhere else. I had heard of it, but I thought I was completely wrong about the details.
So another destination that you might take on a cruise would be a Canada, New England cruise. And those tend to be in the fall, going up the East Coast from Boston into Canada, sometimes visiting Quebec, Prince Edward Island. It's one that I've watched but never pulled the trigger on. Fall travel isn't always easy for me, being a teacher. And also leaving out of the East Coast, you might go to Bermuda is another pretty big destination.
New York to Bermuda especially, right?
Or Boston, either of those. Too. And then, of course, there is the Hawaii cruises, which Norwegian, if you are looking to go to Hawaii on a cruise, Norwegian is the only cruise line that offers cruises that go entirely in the Hawaiian Islands. So I don't want to get into the weird American political thing with the Passenger Vessel Services Act, but it is not permissible for a non-U.S. flagged ship to visit U.S. ports without also visiting a foreign port. So Norwegian has a American-built flag and staffed ship known as the Pride of America, and it is able to go to all of the Hawaiian Islands without having to go to Polynesia or something else. I know a lot of the other Hawaiian cruises do like San Francisco to French Polynesia to Hawaii and then possibly back. It's a very long cruise and lots of sea days.
Those are not close together.
So if you're looking to cruise Hawaii and not take several weeks to do it, Norwegian is the one to look at.
Yeah, it's going to be more expensive, obviously, for that reason. And also, there's no casino, right?
No casino, no.
But because they're not in international...
Right, they're never in international waters.
Which I should clarify, it's not because I know you all love gambling. A casino often subsidizes the operations of a ship. So when you're on a ship that doesn't have a casino, that usually means the fares are much higher.
One of the reasons that Disney is a lot higher than the other cruise lines as well. And then, of course, there are more exotic... You might find kind of expedition ships that go to South America, to Asia.
I really want to do South America.
To Africa. There are some Australian cruises as well. So pretty much if It is on the ocean. You can cruise there. And then there's all those river cruises, especially in Europe. Egypt has a lot of river cruises.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of river cruise knowledge. I think that would be a good thing for us to dig into and maybe talk about more another time. But yeah, they're out there for sure.
But yeah, so I mean, you can visit so much of the world on a cruise ship. And yeah, don't dismiss them. I know we talked about all the ethical issues around cruising, but there are so many places that you can see, and we still cruise. You just have to be aware of those things. And now I tend to be pretty good when it comes to finding deals on cruises. Like I mentioned, in 2023, we took our cheapest cruise ever in a very interesting itinerary and on a high-end cruise line. So there are deals to be had, although I have not found them for 2024. I will kind of put that caveat out there. But I like to use a cruise search engine and pick dates that you're looking at. You can search for an entire month. If you're looking for a summer cruise, you can search June and July. However, if you were looking for a 7-night cruise, you can look for that. And then honestly, I just search by the cheapest ones. And then I look at the ports, because we don't cruise for the ship experience. We cruise for the destination. So that's what I'm looking for. And sometimes you'll find something wild, like a California coastal cruise on Celebrity. And then I also bookmark them. We're not kind of impulse bookers when it comes to things. So when it comes to travel, I should say. So I will bookmark interesting cruises. And then whenever we're ready to book something, I go back through my bookmarks. And if there's a great deal, that's when we book it. And I've found decent deals. Like when I told somebody in 2022 that we paid $750 for a balcony cabin in Alaska, they were shocked.
Yeah. The other thing I think to note too, as much as we typically wait to pounce, so to speak, as long as you're not booking non-refundable, if the price drops substantially, you can do a rebook, right? And we've done that a couple of times.
Yeah, both of the cruises we took last year.
And then sometimes you could just rebook you, sometimes, or a reprice is what they call it. There's been at least one occasion where we had to fully cancel and then book a new booking. And I think what we lost was a $30 fee or something like that, which we more than made up for by the price savings. So it's a little bit different than something like airfare, where unless you're booking super expensive non-refundable flights, you're kind of locked in. There's more wiggle room down the road. I think from the first time we booked the transatlantic to our final reprice, I think we saved $1,000. Like it was $1,000 less.
And sometimes you might not get that money back on your credit card, but they could put you in an upgraded cabin or give you onboard credit for the difference.
Yeah. So if you've got some sort of flexibility, like Ashleigh said, we do wait for what we feel like is a good price, but then we don't stop watching. Right. We kind of keep watching and seeing if we can get it even better.
And some people swear by booking right when the cruises are announced. They think that that's the best. And that works for some people. We just don't really plan that far in advance.
No, and a lot of people can't. Like we can't usually. It's not that we don't want to. It's just we can't.
And then the other thing to think about when you're cruising is how to find the best excursions. So I'm going to break it to you. The cruise line excursions are not the best excursions. They are counting on you being afraid of missing the ship and paying them lots of money for a lesser experience. It might not always be a lesser experience, but
no, sometimes it is exactly the same.
Sometimes it is exactly.
But you pay twice as much.
But you pay twice as much. I will give once again the example of the Azores. We booked a third-party excursion. We had a semi-private tour. It was us and one other family of 4. We had, was it like a minivan?
It was a van.
And a guide who made lunch reservations for us at a place to have a kind of traditional Azorean food.
Typical Azorean.
Typical Azorean meal. And he gave us a tour of the island, and he was able to get us to a viewpoint that the big cruise ship buses couldn't get to. So what was the name of that?
Was that Lagoa de Fogo?
Yeah, however you say that. I'm sorry.
Fire Lake.
I don't speak. We are not fluent in Portuguese.
Working on it.
But he got us higher up. All the cruise ships, the cruise ship buses parked down at the bottom where they could see the lake. And then he took us up a really big hill and we sat on the cliff and we could see them. And oh my gosh, in that moment, I was like, I think this is the best cruise ship excursion I've ever taken. Yeah. It was amazing.
We were in a place where the other family's kids could have easily just rolled down.
They could have just rolled down.
Like, this is the real deal. Cruise line's not taking you there.
Well, I don't think the big bus could get there.
No, well,
and that's kind of my point. Yeah, you miss out when you're in the giant. And then our next port, we went to Madeira. And because of a mistake on my end, I had booked a third-party excursion. And then a few days before, I was like, I should make sure that the dates and the times are correct. And they weren't. If we would have done the excursion that I had previously booked, we would have missed the ship by like 2 hours.
Yeah,
Which is not a place you want to be. So last minute, we went with the cruise line excursion. We were in the big bus. They took us down the road, pulled over on the side of the main road to get the photo ops. And it was fine, but it was a very disappointing experience, especially compared to the experience we had in the Azores.
It was great for the views, but we missed out on a lot of the culture, I think.
And most of the third-party excursion companies guarantee to get you back to the ship on time. And when they guarantee it, you have to remember, if they don't get you back on the ship, they will pay to fly you to the next port. If they were doing that a lot, do you think they would still be in business?
Yeah.
Most of them, they get you back 2 hours early. And typically if we're off exploring on our own, not on any sort of organized excursion, that's kind of my time frame. I want to make sure we're back 2 hours early, because then if there's something wrong, you have 2 hours to catch up.
What if I really need to slam some jerk chicken though? Is an hour okay? That happens.
That happened. I was a little stressed out. We were like 30 minutes away from the ship. I'm like, can we go? We only have 30. I mean,
we were 5 minutes.
No, we could see the ship. We were about 30 minutes from where we needed to be back on board, and I was getting a little antsy.
It's important to mention we're talking about things in general. Of course, if you're booking an excursion third party, like check those people out, make sure it's legit. Like what we're saying doesn't necessarily apply universally to everyone, but I think the message is don't be afraid, and you can have a better experience.
You can have a much better experience that's not this giant bus crammed with tons and tons of people where they just take you literally to the side of the road. There's better options than that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone to ports and we have rented a car and drove around. We've walked around in ports. You just have to be mindful of the time. And some people will be like, oh, I saw those people running back to the ship. They were going to miss it. Those people weren't on a third-party excursion. Those people were at the bar. Let's be completely honest.
Right.
They were at Senor Frog's and they were looking at their watch.
In all likelihood, just manage your risk appropriately. Understand kind of where you are in the world and what the particular risks are there, and make the decision. Sometimes the cruise line excursion might be the best excursion, but a lot of times it's not. And the reason I think why we're talking about this is because so many people that we've encountered just dismiss out of hand the idea that they would ever book a third-party excursion. And that's the wrong choice. That's the wrong choice. Weigh all of your options and make the best choice. Right. And that can include third party.
Right. And if you're looking for a company for third-party shore excursions, I don't want to name any, but just Google it.
Until we're sponsored.
And once they give us money, we would gladly recommend them.
The shore excursions people, get in touch. Thanks.
So those are the reasons that we love to cruise, and we would be hitting the open sea again if I could find another deal now.
We'll find one.
We'll find one.
We'll get on it. If I have to build the boat myself.
And our travel tip for this episode is around some kind of out-of-the-box ways to find deals on flights.
Yeah, I want to tell you something. We are flying to Sicily this summer, and we will, in all likelihood, spend about $350 to $400 a person to get there from Detroit, Michigan. Nothing, right? How did I do it? Let me tell you. It's not a direct flight. It's not a direct flight. That's obvious. But it's also not a terrible flight. I know a lot of times when we think about connecting, we just think about these nightmare situations, and we've done some of them. I mean, we've sat in the airport for 8-9 hours, and it's not fun. No one really likes to do that. But we've wanted to go to Italy and to Sicily in particular, and we know that there are good values to be had from certain American cities, not ours. And so we know where we can get to relatively inexpensively. We know where we can fly to Sicily relatively inexpensively from. And so it's a matter of sort of connecting the dots. And so I was doing some searching yesterday, trying to figure out what to do. And I was searching one way. And that's really sort of the heart of the tip today, is searching one way and looking for open loops. where you're going to fly to one city, you're going to travel around in that place for a while, and you're going to probably fly back from another city. And so searching one way can really give you more of an idea of what's possible. And in this example, I found a flight that had a 16-hour layover in Paris. Now, that sounds really bad, right? But think about it, actually. 16 hours is enough time to do a lot of stuff. I really, really dislike the 8-hour layover or thereabouts, right? Because a lot of times in major cities, there's not enough time if the airport is not in the city center, especially, which is almost never is, to really feel comfortable having to go through security again, having to get in some sort of either public transit or taxi or whatever to get to the city center.
And then what do you do with your luggage?
What do you do with your luggage? That whole thing, right? At first I'm like, hey, do you want to fly through Paris and have a 16-hour layover? It's only like $217. That was the base fare before the add-ons. But then 16 hours, get in at 1 p.m., leave the next morning. Oh my gosh, we can have a half day in Paris.
And we should probably mention that I have never been to Paris.
Right.
And
it's flown out of there.
I've flown in and out of Paris. I have been to France. I have never spent any time outside of Charles de Gaulle. And I should say also that Paris is pretty high on the top of my bucket list. But with everybody being like, don't go to Paris this year because of the Olympics, we were kind of not looking at Paris.
And so to be clear, 16 hours is obviously not enough to do even a tenth of what Paris has to offer. But as a bonus to this trip, in addition to having this cool Italy trip, we're also going to get to spend a half day in Paris. And by the way, getting there for the two of us is going to cost less than $1,000. It's just a kind of flight searching that I think a lot of people don't do. And for not every trip could we even do this. You have to have the luxury of time and to be able to do the open-ended thing and all that. But it's going to be amazing. And I'm going to, pay the least I've ever paid to get to Europe, I'm sure. It's
kind of shockingly inexpensive to get from the continental United States to mainland Europe.
It's on budget airlines, so I was adding on the carry-ons and all that. I'm like, this is still going to be like dirt cheap even after all that. But anyway, we'll talk more about that trip as it materializes and then certainly as it happens. But I just wanted to share, look at one-ways, look at open itineraries, consider self-transfers, consider flying one airline out there and a different airline back. It takes more time to search this way, obviously, and using meta searches like Kayak, Skyscanner, Google Flights. But if flying inexpensively is important to you, there are deals to be had. I did not think we would fly to Europe this year inexpensively. I just didn't think it would be possible.
That's not the narrative.
Right. But I mean, yeah, like I said, the base fares were $217 a person for this.
And I feel like we should talk about last summer coming back. So I mentioned earlier, we did a transatlantic. We ended up in Portugal. We needed to get back from Europe. We found a pretty decent flight on Iceland Air. If you don't know, pretty much exclusively give you time in Iceland. It's a way to get people to Iceland, to get them money flowing in their economy.
And it's working.
Because that was a very busy airport. And it was, we only had, 14 hours altogether, counting the time that we slept in a very expensive, not so great hotel. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't a ton of time. We didn't get to see everything. But just like with Paris, Iceland has always been high on my list. Got a little taste. We drove around. We saw the sheep that pose for pictures. I don't know if anybody else's experience, but we noticed in Iceland there were sheep that seemed to stop what they were doing when you pulled up your camera. Yeah, we got to see some crazy volcanic and geothermal activity and just got a little taste of Iceland. Do I tell people I've been to Iceland? Yes. Do I tell people that we've seen everything in Iceland? Absolutely not.
No.
Would I do it again? 100% I would do it again.
Yeah, and it broke up the trip a little bit too, which is nice. There's definitely a trade-off between flying direct, which is really great, but then also if you have a really long flight, sometimes it's kind of nice to be able to break it up. And if you can break it up in a way that is comfortable and doesn't make it worse, then that's a really nice thing.
Yeah, Iceland is a great way to break up a transatlantic flight.
Yeah. That's all for today's episode of Go, See, Do, Explore. Thank you for joining us and sharing in the wonder of travel.
Keep the spirit of today's adventure alive by checking out our blog at goseedoexplore.com for even more travel inspiration.
Don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps fellow travelers find us and join our community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep traveling by any means necessary.
I'm Christopher.
And I'm Ashleigh, bidding you farewell and happy exploring.